You wake up, and before your feet even touch the floor, the stress has already arrived. Your phone lights up with emails from multiple time zones, Slack messages blinking red with urgency, and your calendar is already double booked. You scroll through the notifications with a sense of dread. A meeting was moved up. A deadline just got tighter. Your manager wants a quick update before lunch on a project you haven't even started yet. You haven't had breakfast. You haven't even breathed properly. And already your nervous system is playing catch-up in a race you never signed up for. This is the modern professional's normal, especially in corporate life, where everything is urgent, expectations are vague but high, and downtime feels like failure. The stress doesn't even feel like a reaction anymore. It feels like a constant background hum, like the fluorescent lights in the office that no one talks about but everyone hears. You try to cope. Coffee becomes fuel. Multitasking becomes your second language. But beneath it all is a subtle fear that one misstep could unravel everything, that if you stop, even for a second, you'll fall behind. So you keep going. But deep down, you wonder if this is sustainable, if this is it, if life really has to feel this way. Now, take a moment to imagine this: a Roman emperor ruling during a time of war, plague, and political betrayal. His empire is crumbling. His best generals are dying. His own advisors might be plotting against him. And yet he writes in his private journal, "Today I escaped anxiety." Or no, I discarded it because it was within me. That emperor was Marcus Aurelius, and that journal became known as Meditations, one of the most widely read texts on Stoic philosophy. He faced more stress than most of us ever will, but he didn't escape it with luxury or denial or distractions. He trained his mind to respond differently. He developed the skill of calm. That's the Stoic superpower. They didn't wait for the world to be calm. They brought calm into the world. And they did it with practices and principles that are still astonishingly relevant today, especially for people over 30 who are buried under the weight of corporate obligations, financial responsibilities, family life, and existential questions they never had time to ask. Because stress isn't just about workload, it's about meaning. It's about identity. It's about how much control you believe you have over your life. And for the Stoics, that belief, that internal sense of control, was everything. The problem today isn't that we're too busy. The problem is that we're constantly pulled away from ourselves. Every ping is someone else's priority invading your nervous system. Every social media scroll reminds you of what you haven't achieved. Every performance review tells you that you're doing well, but... So how do we live like Stoics in a modern jungle of KPIs, PowerPoints, and HR policies? First, by recognizing that stress isn't an enemy to be eliminated. It's a signal, a wake-up call. And the Stoics were obsessed with listening to what their inner world was trying to say. When Seneca, one of the most powerful men in Rome, was exiled without warning by Emperor Claudius, he didn't spiral. He didn't rage. He wrote letters. He used the forced stillness to reflect. He treated stress like a mirror, something that revealed his assumptions and attachments. In one letter, he said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Think about that the next time you panicked about a client email, or rehearse a negative outcome before it's even happened. The Stoics understood that most of our stress is self-generated. We tell ourselves stories about how things should be, how people should behave, how outcomes should unfold, and when reality doesn't match the script in our heads, we suffer. That's why they trained themselves to expect the unexpected. They didn't hope for ease, they prepared for adversity. Not because they were pessimists, but because they were realists, and in that preparation, they found peace. That's the first major shift in how Stoics handled stress. They embraced it as part of life, not a flaw in life. They didn't say, "I'll be calm when things go well." They said, "Let me be the kind of person who stays calm regardless of what comes." That's a powerful distinction. And it leads us to the second shift, ownership. In modern life, we've been conditioned to believe that stress is something done to us. My job is stressful. My boss is stressful. My commute is stressful. But the Stoics would say, no, your thoughts about your job, your boss, and your commute are what's stressful. They'd argue that events are neutral. What makes them painful is our interpretation. That may sound harsh, especially when you're dealing with real workplace dysfunction, but it's liberating because if your reaction is the source, then your reaction is also the solution. You can't control everything, but you can control your mindset. And that's where Stoicism becomes a tool set, not just a philosophy. You're not at the mercy of your calendar. You're not powerless in the face of pressure. You can train yourself to respond differently. But this doesn't happen by accident. It happens through small, daily mental exercises, like checking in with yourself in the morning and asking, what might stress me out today? Then mentally rehearsing your response. It happens when you catch your thoughts in the middle of the day and say, is this actually a problem or just my ego talking? It happens when you decide to slow your breath before a tense meeting, when you choose silence instead of sarcasm, when you recognize that your worth isn't tied to the outcome of a project. This is what the Stoics meant by philosophy. It wasn't theory, it was practice. And in practice, they found inner freedom. We live in a culture that rewards outward performance, but neglects inward clarity. Stoicism reverses that. It says, you are not your metrics. You are not your job title. You are your values, your choices, your mindset. And once you reconnect with that, stress becomes something you can observe, not something you drown in. This isn't easy, but it's possible. And it starts with one truth the Stoics held above all else. You always have a choice in how you respond. Always. Even in the chaos. Especially in the chaos. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, remember, you're not broken. You're just using an outdated mental model. It's time to upgrade, not with productivity hacks or hustle culture slogans, but with ancient wisdom that's endured for centuries. Because calm isn't a luxury, it's a skill. And the Stoics, they were masters of it.
To the Stoics, stress was never the enemy. They didn't label it as something to fear or fight against. Instead, they saw stress as a reaction, not a reality. Epictetus, once a slave who rose to become one of the most respected philosophers in Rome, famously said, "It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things." That one line alone dismantles the way most people today understand anxiety, frustration, and burnout. Because if it's true that external events do not disturb us directly, but only through the meaning we attach to them, then the path to calm doesn't lie in controlling the world, but in mastering our interpretations. Think about that. Your overflowing inbox does not stress you out. What stresses you is the belief that you must respond to everything immediately, or people will think you're falling behind. Your micromanaging boss doesn't ruin your day. What ruins your day is the story you tell yourself about what their behavior says about your competence, your standing, or your future. Your coworker's rude tone doesn't make you angry. The anger comes from the meaning you assign to it: disrespect, judgment, insult. The Stoics taught that we are not disturbed by events themselves, but by the thoughts we form in response to them. That truth is quietly explosive. It doesn't just explain why stress takes hold, it explains how we can unhook from it. In the Stoic framework, everything begins with what they called the dichotomy of control. Simply put, there are things in life you can control, and there are things you cannot. Your thoughts, your choices, your behavior, those are within your power. The economy, your boss's mood, your client's demands, those are not. Modern stress, especially in corporate life, often comes from trying to control what lies outside that circle. We try to manage perceptions, predict outcomes, and prevent people from thinking poorly of us. We stress over promotions we don't control, decisions we aren't part of, and feedback we cannot shape. The Stoics would say this is wasted energy. More than that, it's self-harm. Every time you tie your peace to something external, you hand over your mental well-being to forces you do not command. That's a dangerous game. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome, sat atop one of the most powerful empires in history, and yet he wrote about powerlessness, not over others, but over his own fortune. You have power over your mind, not outside events. He reminded himself again and again. That was not a defeatist thought. It was a declaration of freedom. The Stoic sees the world as unpredictable, but not uncontrollable, because even when the outer world falls apart, the inner world can stay intact. And that's the foundation of the Stoic mindset. Real strength begins in the space between stimulus and response. You might get an unfair performance review. The stimulus hits, but in that brief moment before you react, you have a window. In that window lives your power. You can spiral into defensiveness and resentment, or you can pause, examine your reaction, and respond from character. The Stoics trained for that moment. Every day they rehearsed what they called mental discipline, the ability to catch thought patterns before they carried them away. Seneca advised his students to pause whenever emotion rose, to stop and ask, is this within my control? Is this worth my peace? Often the answer was no, and if the answer was no, the emotion had no further right to grow. This doesn't mean Stoics were emotionless. It means they refused to be ruled by emotions they did not examine. They believed emotions were data, not destiny. Anger was a signal. Fear was a teacher. Anxiety was a warning flag, but none of them were truths in and of themselves. Modern stress often escalates because we never interrogate it. We feel overwhelmed and assume the feeling must be accurate. But the Stoic stops and inspects the sensation. Is this actually urgent? Or have I been conditioned to treat everything as a fire? Is this person trying to insult me? Or do they just have poor communication habits? Is my career really in danger? Or did I just have one bad meeting? By examining your reactions, you take ownership of them. And ownership is the gateway to composure. There's a modern term for what the Stoics practiced: cognitive distancing. It's the ability to observe your thoughts without becoming them. When Epictetus taught his students, he urged them to describe situations without emotional coloring. Not, my manager humiliated me, but my manager spoke in a sharp tone. Not, this project is a disaster, but this project has faced unexpected delays. That subtle shift changes everything. Because when you remove judgment, you remove unnecessary suffering. You begin to see things as they are, not as your emotions distort them. That clarity is the core of Stoic strength. They weren't stronger than most people, they just saw more clearly. And when you see clearly, stress loses its grip. Imagine waking up to a calendar full of meetings. You feel the old anxiety start to build, but instead of racing forward on autopilot, you stop. You ask, what is exactly making me tense? You realize it's a single meeting with one person who always speaks in circles. You remind yourself, I cannot control how they speak. I can control how I listen, how I respond, how I hold my posture. You prepare your mind. You enter the meeting composed. You leave the meeting unshaken. That is not magic. That is mental discipline. That is the Stoic mindset in motion. And it works not because it eliminates pressure, but because it removes unnecessary friction. Most people carry around dozens of invisible weights, fears, projections, assumptions, interpretations. The Stoics drop those weights and move through the day lighter. You can too. You can stop tying your value to your output. You can stop expecting the world to be fair. You can stop waiting for your team to change before you feel calm. The Stoics accepted life on life's terms. That acceptance gave them freedom. It didn't make them passive. It made them effective. They acted without being agitated. They worked without being wounded by every obstacle. And that kind of composure is rare in the modern world, which is exactly why it's so powerful. When everything feels urgent, the calm person stands out. When chaos spreads, the calm person leads. And when others burn out, the calm person indoors. That's not just philosophy, that's a competitive advantage. And it all begins with a shift in mindset. You are not your stress. You are not your thoughts. You are the observer, the chooser, the one who decides how to respond. And once you see that clearly, the world no longer feels like an attack. It feels like a challenge. And challenges, the Stoics would say, are precisely what shape the soul.
The Stoics didn't wait for peace to arrive. They trained for it. Just like an athlete builds muscle through repeated resistance, Stoics built mental strength by voluntarily engaging with discomfort. This wasn't masochism, it was preparation. Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, routinely slept on the floor, wore simple clothes, and ate plain food. Why? So that when real hardship came, he would not be surprised. He called this practice voluntary discomfort. And it wasn't about suffering for the sake of suffering. It was about building psychological immunity. Because when you train your mind to be okay with less, with difficulty, with imperfection, you become less shaken by the chaos of life. That's where most stress in the corporate world comes from. Not the work itself, but the fear of losing something. Fear of losing your job, fear of losing status, fear of not meeting expectations, fear of discomfort. But if you rehearse being okay without those things, you strip fear of its leverage. Seneca would ask, "Is this the condition I feared?" And often the answer was anticlimactic. The terrible thing he had imagined turned out to be survivable, even manageable. This kind of mindset training is rare in modern life. We are constantly encouraged to avoid pain, avoid risk, avoid failure. But the Stoic runs toward it in controlled doses, like a vaccine. Not because they enjoy it, but because they understand what it builds: resilience, equanimity, clarity. Today, you can do the same. You don't have to sleep on the floor, but you can take a cold shower. You can fast for a morning. You can say no to something convenient. You can walk somewhere instead of drive. You can put your phone away during discomfort instead of using it to numb your senses. These are small things, but they sharpen your edge. They remind you that comfort is not a need, only a preference. That distinction makes all the difference when stress hits. When the email is sharp, when the client is angry, when the numbers miss the target. If your peace is fragile based on things going well, then you'll break easily. But if your peace is practiced, forged in small moments of resistance, then you won't be so shaken. You'll take the hit and keep moving. You'll adjust instead of react. And that's not just stoicism, that's leadership. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, wrote in his journal nearly every day, not as a ruler, as a man trying to stay sane. His meditations were not meant for publication. They were reminders to himself, notes to keep him grounded. In one passage he wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed." That is power. The power of interpretation. But to choose that mindset under pressure, you must train when the stakes are low. That's what daily practice is for. Modern Stoicism begins in your habits. Do you begin the day with clarity or with chaos? The Stoics would rise early and reflect. What challenges might I face today? What emotions might I encounter? How will I choose to respond? This was called the morning reflection. It's not about predicting the future. It's about preparing your mind. When you walk into the day already braced for difficulty, you're not caught off guard when it comes. That's the opposite of most people today. We begin the day in a rush. We check email before we breathe. We're reactive before we're awake. No wonder stress dominates us. We never meet it on our terms. The Stoic mindset is different. It says, I expect resistance. I welcome it. I will not be surprised by hardship. And because of that, when things go wrong, you don't panic. You respond.
That's the muscle we build through daily practice. In the evening, Stoics would do a nightly review. They would ask themselves, what did I do well today? Where did I fall short? What emotions carried me? What decisions honored my character? This reflection was not about shame, it was about awareness. You cannot improve what you don't observe. This is where modern professionals can grow the most, not by reading more productivity hacks, but by reviewing their behavior with honesty. Where did I react instead of choose? Where did I try to control the uncontrollable? Where did I trade peace for pride? These reflections build self-awareness, and self-awareness is the antidote to most stress. Because when you know yourself, you can catch the early signs. You feel the tension before it explodes. You adjust your posture. You shift your breathing. You change your language. You step away instead of snapping. The Stoics understood this wasn't easy, but it was essential. Training the mind, they believed, was the only true freedom. Everything else was luck. The paycheck, the praise, the promotion, none of it was guaranteed. But your response, that was yours. That could be shaped, strengthened, honed. That's what makes Stoicism so relevant today. In a world full of uncontrollable outcomes, it gives you something solid to hold on to. Yourself, your mindset, your values, your choices. And when those are trained, the rest of life becomes more manageable. Not easy, but lighter, more navigable. Because stress stops being the default. It becomes a signal, a message, a moment to apply your training. That's why the Stoics practiced daily, not because they expected peace, but because they knew peace had to be chosen, created, maintained. And the only person who could do that was you.
One of the most misunderstood ideas in Stoicism is that it's about suppressing emotions. People hear words like reason, logic, and detachment and assume that Stoics were cold or robotic. But that's not true. The Stoics didn't reject emotions. They studied them. They questioned their source. They asked, is this feeling useful? Is this reaction helping me or hurting me? Because emotion, left unexamined, leads to chaos. Anger can burn bridges. Fear can paralyze decisions. Envy can poison relationships. But when emotions are understood, they become tools. They inform rather than control. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That strength is emotional discipline, and it's the key to stress management in any high-pressure environment. At work, this means not letting a rude email ruin your day. It means not carrying resentment from one meeting into the next. It means learning to pause. That pause is where Stoicism lives. Between stimulus and response, between trigger and reaction, there is a space. Most people rush through it, reacting out of habit, but the Stoic learns to stretch it, to breathe in that space, to question the impulse. Why am I angry? What belief is fueling this stress? What story am I telling myself? And is it true? This practice is powerful because most of our stress isn't caused by events. It's caused by interpretation. A colleague interrupts you. That's a fact. You tell yourself, they don't respect me. That's a story. The emotion that follows, anger, frustration, stress, is not from the event. It's from the story. The Stoic method is to separate the two, to see the event as neutral, and to examine the interpretation before it solidifies. This isn't easy, especially in fast-paced environments, but that's why it's training. You catch yourself once, then again, and eventually it becomes second nature. You develop a kind of emotional radar when you feel the tension rising and know what to do with it. Not suppress it, not explode, but hold it, look at it, and respond with intention. Epictetus said, "It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things." This is the core of emotional discipline. Changing your judgments changes your emotions. At work, this might look like choosing curiosity over defensiveness. When someone criticizes your project, instead of snapping back or shutting down, you ask, "What can I learn from this?" That question reframes the entire situation. The stress becomes energy for growth. The attack becomes a lesson. You remain in control. This is what the Stoics called tranquility, not the absence of noise, but the presence of inner stillness amid the noise. a calm center that doesn't get pulled by every push. That's emotional mastery. And it's not just about what happens in the moment, it's about how you prepare for those moments. The Stoics used journaling as a daily way to track their emotional responses, not to vent, but to understand. What triggered me today? What did I expect that didn't happen? What assumptions did I carry? What would a wise person have done? These are powerful questions. They turn every stressful situation into a mirror. They reveal patterns. You start to see, oh, I always get reactive when I feel ignored, or I tend to shut down when I think I'm failing. That awareness is gold, because you can't change what you don't notice. Emotional discipline isn't about being unaffected, it's about being intentional. The Stoics knew that emotions would come, but they believed you could decide what came next. That is your power. And that's why it's so practical today. In the corporate world, stress is often seen as a badge of honor. People brag about how busy they are, how many fires they're putting out. But the Stoic doesn't chase chaos. They seek clarity. They ask, what's in my control? What's just noise? Then they act from that center. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. And it's deeply rare. Because in high-pressure environments, emotions run wild. Deadlines loom, egos clash, competition flares. Without emotional discipline, it's easy to become reactive, to take everything personally, to spiral. But the Stoic steps back, not out of apathy, but out of strength. They choose their response. They protect their peace, and that gives them an edge. Because in moments of tension, the calmest person usually leads. Emotional mastery becomes strategic. It makes you better at handling people, at making decisions, at enduring pressure. It makes you resilient. And resilience in today's world is more valuable than any technical skill. Because stress is not going away, complexity is not going away. But your relationship with it can change. That's the promise of Stoicism. Not that life will get easier, but that you will get stronger, more grounded, more deliberate. And that begins with how you treat your emotions, not as enemies, but as signals, not as weaknesses, but as data. Data you can learn from, patterns you can transform, habits you can rewire, but only if you look closely, only if you pause long enough to see what's really happening. That's where the Stoic lives, not in the absence of stress, but in the presence of insight. So the next time you feel stress rising, don't run from it. Don't shame it. Ask what it's trying to tell you. Ask what belief it's connected to. Ask what choice you still have. Because in that moment, your freedom begins.
So what does it actually look like to practice Stoicism daily in a modern work environment? It's one thing to understand the concepts, but real change comes from consistent action, not theory. The Stoics believed in daily habits that shaped character, trained the mind, and prepared the soul for adversity. One of the most powerful habits was morning reflection. Marcus Aurelius would start his day by reminding himself of what he was likely to face. He wrote, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." That might sound pessimistic, but it's actually liberating. He was preparing, not complaining. He knew that expecting difficulty helps us meet it with calm, not surprise. So in your life, that could mean taking 5 minutes each morning to center yourself before the chaos begins. You remind yourself, I will face delays. I will face people who disagree. I will be misunderstood. I will not control everything. And that's okay, because I control how I respond. That mindset creates resilience before the stress hits, not after. Another daily practice is negative visualization. This is where you imagine things going wrong, not to scare yourself, but to become less afraid of outcomes. Seneca advised, rehearse worst-case scenarios regularly so they lose their power. If you fear losing your job, imagine it. Then ask yourself, what would I do? Who could I rely on? What value do I have beyond this title? You begin to see that the worst-case scenario is rarely the end of the world, and often just a new beginning. This practice trains anti-fragility, the ability to grow stronger from pressure rather than break under it. In a corporate setting, this reduces panic during restructures, tough feedback, or unexpected change. You remain grounded, not because nothing can shake you, but because you've already imagined the shaking and know who you are within it. Next is the evening review. This was Epictetus's favorite tool. At the end of each day, the Stoic would ask, what did I do well? What did I fail to do? What could I do better tomorrow? This isn't about guilt, it's about clarity. You don't judge yourself, you observe yourself, and from that observation, you grow. For you, this might be journaling before bed, asking yourself, where did I lose patience today? What triggered stress? How did I respond? What belief was behind that? And what will I try next time? This creates a feedback loop where every day is a training session, every moment a lesson. You're no longer a passive victim of stress, you're an active student of it. Another habit is practicing gratitude, but not in a fluffy, surface-level way. The Stoic kind of gratitude is fierce. It's about appreciating what you have without clinging to it. Seneca wrote, "He is a great man who uses earthenware as if it were silver, and silver as if it were earthenware." Meaning, enjoy your blessings but stay ready to lose them. That mindset makes you less reactive, less needy, and more appreciative. You stop demanding comfort from the world and start cultivating strength within yourself. Gratitude becomes armor, not just a mood booster. Finally, there's the practice of voluntary discomfort. The Stoics would sometimes fast, sleep on the ground, or wear simple clothes, not to punish themselves, but to remind the body who is in charge, that comfort is not a right and that happiness does not depend on luxury. In modern life, this might mean taking cold showers, giving up social media for a day, choosing to speak less and listen more, or tackling the hardest task first at work. It's about choosing the hard thing so that when life chooses it for you, you're already trained. You've already shown yourself, I can endure, I can adapt. I don't need everything to go my way to stay steady. These small acts build inner confidence that doesn't depend on circumstances. It's not about suffering, it's about training discipline, just like going to the gym trains the body. Stoicism trains the soul, and like the gym, it works only if done consistently. Not perfectly, just consistently. The point is not to be some flawless sage, but to be just a little more composed today than you were yesterday, to react 1 second slower, to choose one better thought, to let go one faster. That's progress. And over time, it compounds. You find yourself calmer in meetings, more thoughtful in conflict, more centered in uncertainty. People notice. They start to say, you're different. You don't seem rattled like before. You seem grounded. That's the Stoic advantage. It's quiet but powerful, and it's built one habit at a time. The modern world is not going to slow down. It's not going to get simpler, but you can get stronger. You can build a daily practice rooted in thousands of years of wisdom and tested by emperors, exiles, soldiers, and philosophers. You can train your mind the way others train their bodies. And you don't need perfect silence, a retreat, or a monastery. You just need a few minutes each day and the willingness to look inward. The battle is not out there, it's in here, and the Stoics knew it. The question is, will you pick up the tools? Will you train? Will you practice? Or will you wait for the stress to win again? The answer starts with one choice, and that choice is yours.